They smiled for the camera, raised their glasses, and called it a beautiful beginning. By dawn, the house felt hollow, the money was gone, and my son's bed was still cold. Silences arrived louder than screams. My son married quietly at the edge of winter, a small ceremony held in a rented hall just outside town. I paid for what I could, sat in the second row, and watched strangers clap like family. The night ended with polite hugs and folded chairs, but something in his eyes lingered, restless, unfinished. By morning, that feeling would turn into a question I couldn't outrun. The clapping stopped before the echo did, chairs scraped the floor. Someone laughed too loudly like they were trying to keep the night alive. Huracan. I stood near the back wall of the hall, holding my coat over my arm, watching the room forget itself. The lights were still warm, but the air had already cooled. That's how weddings end sometimes. Not with a feeling, but with a draft. My son was smiling. Reckon. He had been smiling all evening. Not the wide kind from when he was younger. This one was careful. Practiced. Like something he'd put on early and forgotten to take off. When he reached me, he didn't say much. Just opened his arms and pulled me in. Longer than usual. Long enough for me to notice the way his shoulders were tight, like he'd been holding something in all night. "I'll call you in the morning," he whispered into my ear. "Not tomorrow, morning." I nodded, because that's what fathers do when they don't want to ask questions too soon. I felt his breath on my collar, felt the pause before he stepped back. He looked at me then, really looked like he was trying to memorize my face in bad lighting. Behind him, the room kept moving. The envelope table sat near the exit, draped in white cloth that had already begun to wrinkle. A few of her relatives stood close to it, not touching anything, just standing. One woman lifted an envelope, weighed it in her hand, then set it back down. Another leaned in, whispering numbers that never reached a full count. Hurry. Nobody laughed there. The DJ announced the last song, though no one danced. People drifted toward the doors in small groups, coats half on, conversations already somewhere else. The joy thinned fast. Like fog under sun, I watched my son walk back to his wife. She took his hand, didn't look at him, just held on, fingers tight, eyes scanning the room like she was already planning the next place they needed to be. The music faded, the lights came up a notch too bright, and just like that, it was over. And I stepped outside into the parking lot. Cold air met me hard, honest. The sky was dark and clear, the kind that makes every sound travel farther. Doors slammed, engines turned over. Someone dropped their keys and cursed softly. I saw my son one last time near a silver car. He was saying goodbye to someone I didn't recognize. He raised his hand when he noticed me watching. A small wave, Salmel, a small wave, almost shy. Then he turned away. The drive home was quiet, the road empty. My headlights cut a narrow path through the dark, and everything beyond it felt unreachable. I passed the old feed store, the field where he learned to drive, the diner where we used to sit in silence after his mother died. Each place looked the same. I didn't. At a red light, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. I tried to think of the right word for what I was feeling. It wasn't sadness. Not exactly. What says. It sat lower than that, heavier. Like something unfinished settling in my chest. The light turned green. I went on. When I got home, the house greeted me the way it always did. Quiet, patient, unchanged. I hung my coat on the hook by the door. The clock in the kitchen ticked too loud. I poured a glass of water and forgot to drink it. On the table sat the wedding program cream paper, gold lettering. I traced my son's name with my finger, the ink slightly raised. He'd been so careful choosing the font, said it mattered how things looked when people remembered them later. I sat down and listened to the house. No phone call, not yet. I thought about the hug again, the way he held on, the way his voice sounded when he said morning, like he wasn't sure which one it would be. Outside, a car passed, then another. Somewhere down the street, a door closed, life moving on, steady and sure of itself. Okay, I went to the window and pulled the curtain back an inch. Frost had already begun to form on the glass. Winter didn't wait for permission. Back at the table, I folded the program once, then again creased it where the paper resisted. I didn't know why I did that, just needed to do something with my hands. I told myself it was just a wedding, just nerves. Endings always feel strange when they dress themselves up as beginnings. Still, the room felt different now, like it was holding its breath. I checked my phone. No messages. The screen reflected my face, older than I remembered, tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. I set the phone down and turned off the light. In the dark, the applause came back to me, the way it rose and fell. How fast it disappeared once it was no longer needed. I wondered how many people drove home feeling lighter, and how many felt like I did, carrying something unnamed into the night. I lay awake longer than I should have. At some point, the house settled. Pipes clicked, clicked. Wood shifted. The clock kept going. Faithful as ever, morning would come, he said he'd call. I closed my eyes and held on to that thought even as it thinned. Even as the silence grew heavier than the celebration that came before it. Because sometimes goodbye doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it just smiles, hugs you close, and leaves while the lights are still on. The light came in before the sound did, a thin gray line slipping through the edge of the curtain. The morning, but not the kind that wakes you gently. The house felt alert, like it had been waiting. I lay there longer than usual, listening to the quiet press against the walls. No birds yet, no cars. Just the low hum of the refrigerator down the hall, and my own breathing, steady but unsure. I reached for my phone before my feet touched the floor. Habit, hope. His name sat there untouched. No missed calls, no messages. The screen dimmed after a few seconds, like it had nothing more to offer me. I told myself it was early. Still, I sat up. The floor was cold when I stood. It always was in winter mornings, even before winter arrived. I padded into the kitchen, the house creaking behind me like it was stretching awake. The kettle went on. I didn't watch it. I watched the window. Instead, the sky outside was the color of old paper. No sun yet, just light without warmth, I called him. The ring sounded louder than it should have in the quiet kitchen. 1 ring, 2, 3. Then the familiar pause before the voicemail picked up. Hey, it's me, I said, keeping my voice even. Just checking in, you said you'd call. I hung up before the beep finished. The kettle clicked off. I poured the water, though I didn't remember filling the mug. Steam rose, then disappeared. I took a sip and burned my tongue, welcomed it, proof I was awake. I waited 5 minutes, then called again. This time the phone went straight to voicemail, no ring, just silence shaped like an answer. And I stood at the counter, phone still in my hand, thumb hovering like it might find a different outcome if it waited long enough. I set the phone down and looked around the kitchen. Everything was where it always was. The chair with the loose leg, the calendar still turned to last month. A quiet, ordinary morning doing its best to look innocent. I went to the table and sat down. The chair scraped softly, the sound too sharp for how empty the room felt. I folded my hands together, then unfolded them. My fingers shook a little. I tucked them under the table like a child. It was then I remembered the account, not because I suspected anything, just a small thought passing through. The kind you have when you want reassurance, when you want to see something familiar and unchanged. I opened the banking app. The number loaded slowly, 1 line at a time. When it finished, I stared. I blinked once. Then again, the balance was wrong, not off by a little, not confusing in a way numbers sometimes are. It was clean, deliberate, a wide space where something had been, Cicerbod, Liln, Gone. I didn't move right away. My mind tried to fix it, tried to explain it gently, a glitch, a pending transfer, something I didn't remember approving, but my chest tightened in a way that didn't feel like confusion. I tapped into the details, the screen scrolled. There it was, a withdrawal timestamped hours after the wedding, authorized, final, no warning, no delay, just done. The kettle began to cool behind me. I could hear it settling, metal ticking softly as it returned to itself. The sound felt louder than the numbers on the screen. I called him again. This time, I stood straight to voicemail. And I didn't leave a message. I couldn't find the right shape for my words. Anything I said felt like it would fall apart before it reached him. I walked to the window and pressed my forehead lightly against the glass. It was colder than I expected. Outside, a car passed slowly, tires hissing over damp pavement. Someone else's morning, moving on schedule. Ken. I tried to remember his face from the night before. The hug, the whisper, I'll call you in the morning. Morning had come. I went back to the table and sat down harder than before. The chair complained. I didn't apologize. My phone buzzed once, and my heart jumped fast enough to hurt. Just an email. Ken, I laughed then. I sat down. It surprised me the room didn't laugh back. I scrolled through my messages. Nothing from him, nothing from anyone who might explain this away. The silence felt arranged. Like something that had been set up carefully and left behind, I thought of the envelope table. The way people lingered, the way no one counted out loud. I stood again, restless now. I paced the length of the kitchen, then the hallway. The mirror by the door caught me off guard. I looked smaller somehow, folded inward. I didn't recognize the man staring back, phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline. And I tried his number one more time, voicemail. I leaned my shoulder against the wall and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. The cool seeped through my clothes. I stayed there, phone resting on my knee, waiting for something to interrupt the moment. Nothing did. The house held its breath. I thought about calling the bank, the police, anyone, everyone. But each option felt like a step in a direction I wasn't ready to walk. Once you name something, it becomes real. It takes up space. It asks things of you I wasn't ready to ask. Instead, I sat there and listened to the quiet, to the refrigerator hum, to the faint sound of a neighbor's door opening down the block, to life continuing in small, unbothered ways. When I finally stood, my legs felt weak. I set the phone down on the counter face up like that might invite it to ring. I made another cup of tea. This time, I waited for the kettle to whistle. It sounded sharp and impatient. I turned it off quickly, as if it had said too much. I didn't drink the tea. I stood at the window again, watching the sky lighten inch by inch, dawn moving forward whether I followed or not. Somewhere between one shade of gray and the next a thought settled in me. Quiet. Heavy. This wasn't a mistake. Mistakes are messy, they leave trails. This was clean, considered, like something decided long before the sun came up. I picked up my phone and held it close, feeling its weight, waiting for it to feel heavier or lack. It didn't change. Outside, the day finally began to look like itself. And inside my chest, a door I hadn't seen before stood slightly open, letting in a cold I knew I wouldn't shake easily. Morning had arrived, my son had not. And the silence, now wide awake, had started asking questions I couldn't yet answer. The key felt heavier than it should have, cold in my palm, like it knew something I didn't. I sat in the car for a moment before using it, watching the building the way you watch a stranger who might recognize you first. His place looked the same as always, same narrow windows, same pale door, no light behind the glass. I told myself that meant nothing. People sleep in, people forget to turn lamps on. Still, I waited, and the engine ticked as it cooled. Somewhere above me, a bird landed, then took off again. The morning had fully arrived, bright enough to show details I didn't want to notice. Ueken and Han Fergaming. I stepped out and walked up the short path. Gravel shifted under my shoes. The sound felt too loud. I tried the handle before unlocking it just in case locked. That settled somewhere low in my chest. Inside, the air was still, not stale, just untouched, like the room had been holding itself together since he left. I closed the door gently behind me, listening to the click of the lock echo down the hallway. No lights. I stood there, letting my eyes adjust. The faint smell reached me first, his cologne. The one he wore only when something mattered. It mixed with dust and the quiet scent of old carpet. A last night smell, a yesterday smell. I flicked on the lamp in the living room. The light came up slow and yellow, revealing nothing out of place. Couch cushions straight, shoes lined neatly by the wall. The mail stacked on the table, unopened, too neat. I walked down the short hall toward the bedroom. Each step felt deliberate, like I was moving through something fragile. The floor creaked once, then stayed quiet. I wondered if it remembered him better than I did. The bedroom door was open, the bed was made, not rushed, not careless. Smoothed down, corners tucked the way his mother used to insist on. The pillows sat side by side, untouched. No dip, no wrinkle, like no one had slept there at all. I stood in the doorway longer than I meant to. His coat hung on the hook behind the door. The brown one, the one he wore when the weather turned. I reached out and touched the sleeve. It was heavy, solid, still holding the shape of his arm. If he'd left in a hurry, he would have taken it. That thought landed quietly. Steadist, I stepped inside. The room felt smaller than it should have, or maybe emptier. The dresser stood against the wall, everything arranged in careful lines, wallet gone, phone gone. Charger still plugged in, cord trailing uselessly toward the floor. On the dresser, near the edge, sat his watch. The old one, scratched face, leather band worn soft from years of use. He'd gotten it after his first real job. Said it made him feel like time could be trusted if you wore it close enough. I picked it up. It wasn't ticking. I turned it over in my hand, thumb brushing the worn back. It was warm. Or maybe my hand was. I couldn't tell the difference. Why leave this? I looked for a suitcase. Closet doors were closed. Inside, his clothes hung in familiar order, work shirts to one side, old t-shirts to the other. Shoes lined up below, nothing missing, nothing disturbed, no bag, no note. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress didn't sink much, it felt firm. Nam hundredi temi tin firm. Unused. I rested the watch beside me, like it might tell me something if I waited long enough. The air felt thick. Each breath carried that same faint cologne, like he was nearby but just out of sight. I closed my eyes and listened. Nothing. No hum of traffic, no voices through the walls. Just the quiet and the soft sound of my own breathing, suddenly too loud in a room that wasn't meant to hear it. I tried to imagine him here last night, standing where I stood, deciding what to take, what to leave, folding the bedspread smooth, hanging his coat back up like he'd be back before it got cold. That's what unsettled me most. This didn't feel like a goodbye, it felt like a pause. Like a pause, efnis, ikanakanapi kabe. I stood and walked to the window. The blinds were half open. Outside, the street looked ordinary. A man walking his dog, a car pulling out of a driveway, life behaving. I wondered if any of them had seen him leave, if he'd nodded at someone, smiled, carried nothing but his thoughts. I turned back to the room and noticed the smallest thing. A speck of dirt on the floor near the door, dried mud, light brown. Out of place against the clean carpet, I crouched and touched it. It crumbled easily, from the field maybe. Or the old lot behind the building, a place he went when he needed quiet. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with understanding. The kind that doesn't ask permission. He hadn't vanished. And he had chosen. I stood again and picked up the watch, slipping it into my pocket without thinking. It felt wrong to leave it there, like leaving a voice behind. I took one last look around the room. Everything waiting. Everything convinced this was temporary. At the door, I hesitated. My hand rested on the frame. The wood felt familiar, warmed by years of use. I leaned my forehead against it for just a second, breathing him in one last time. "What kind of leaving leaves things behind?" I whispered, though no one was there to hear it. The room didn't answer. I turned off the lamp. The light disappeared, and the room returned to itself. Quiet, holding its secrets. When I locked the door behind me, the sound felt final in a way nothing else had yet. I stood there on the small landing, key still in my hand, listening to the building settle. The sun was higher now, brighter, the day moving forward without waiting for me to catch up. I walked back to my car slowly, each step heavier than the last. The watch pressed against my leg with every movement, a small reminder of time continuing whether we wore it or not. Now my spur. As I drove away, I checked the rearview mirror. The building grew smaller, then disappeared. He had left no message. No explanation, just a room full of things that expected him to return. And the quiet understanding that whatever had taken him didn't need luggage. It only needed resolve. I drove on, carrying his watch and the weight of a choice I hadn't been invited to make, knowing that somewhere ahead the answers were already waiting. Just not yet. The paper trembled when I unfolded it, thin, cream-colored. Names written in careful ink, each one chosen, each one present for something that now felt unfinished. I sat at the kitchen table with the guest list spread in front of me, a pen resting where my hand kept drifting back to it. Morning light came through the window in quiet stripes, landing on names like it was trying to read them too. I told myself this was just a formality, just checking, just making sure I hadn't missed something obvious. The phone felt heavier today. I dialed the first number at print office. It rang twice before a woman answered, her voice bright in that polite way people use when they're unprepared for wait. "Oh yes," she said when I told her who I was. "Beautiful wedding. Your son looked so happy." And that word again, I pictured him on the dance floor, the careful smile, the way he moved like he was trying not to step on anyone's expectations. "Did you see him leave?" I asked, a pause. Short, almost nothing, no, she said, but it was late, people were coming and going. She wished me well and hung up before I could ask anything else. I circled her name without meaning to. The next call went to voicemail. The next call went to voicemail, then another answered too quickly. "Oh, he danced," a man said. Really got into it, laughed a lot. I waited, let the silence stretch a little, and when he left, I asked, "Oh, well," the man said, clearing his throat. I stepped outside for a smoke around midnight. Didn't see anything unusual. Nothing unusual. I thanked him and hung up. The kitchen felt smaller with each call. The quiet grew thicker, like something settling in the corners. I moved my chair closer to the table without noticing, leaning over the list as if proximity might loosen the truth. Name after name, voices blended together. He was glowing. They looked so in love. Everyone was having such a good time. No one saw him leave. No one noticed a goodbye. One woman laughed softly when I asked, "You know how weddings are," she said. "You blink and someone's gone." I didn't laugh back. Some voices hesitated. You could hear it in the breath before they answered, the way sentences came out rearranged, careful, as if they were choosing which version of the night to remember. Others rushed me off the line. Apologies stacked too neatly. Excuses ready. I really should get back to work. My kids are calling me. My kids. I hope everything turns out all right. Click. I leaned back, and stared at the ceiling. A small crack ran above the light fixture, one I'd never bothered to fix. It looked wider now. I wondered how many people notice exits. How many are watching closely enough to see someone slip away without drawing attention? I dialed a number near the bottom of the list, a cousin of the bride. I remembered him standing near the envelope table most of the night, hands in his pockets, eyes sharp. Kike endation fair tepper your dever and T seka. He answered, on the third ring. Yes, he said. I introduced myself. Oh, he said. Yes, of course. And his voice shifted, not unfriendly, just alert. You saw my son last night, I said. Yes, he said quickly. He seemed fine. Did you see him leave? Silence longer this time? I stepped out early, he said finally. Parking was getting tight. I waited. I didn't see him go, he added. Sorry. I thanked him. Hung up. My reflection stared back at me from the dark phone screen. I looked older than I had 2 days ago, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I pushed the guest list away and stood. The chair legs scraped loudly against the floor, the sound breaking the room open. I walked to the sink and ran water over my hands. Though they weren't dirty, the water felt grounding cold. Real, I turned it off and stood there, hands dripping, listening to the quiet rush fade. And back at the table, I picked up the list again. My pen hovered. I hadn't written anything useful, just circles. Lines, small marks that meant nothing to anyone else. That's when it came to me. They all said the same thing. He laughed, he danced, he looked happy. No one talked about his eyes. No one mentioned how often he checked the door, how his smile arrived before the feeling, how he hugged me like he was measuring time. And I realized then that happiness, when performed well, convinces people not to look closer. Smiles can hide many exits. I folded the list slowly, creasing it along the same lines it already had. It fit back into my pocket like it belonged there, like it had always been waiting to be folded away. Outside, a car door slammed. Somewhere, someone called out a name. Ordinary sounds, ordinary lives. I sat back down and let the quiet return. Maybe someone had noticed more than they admitted. A glance held too long, a moment that didn't sit right. But noticing is one thing. Saying it out loud is another. People protect themselves with silence. They tuck uncomfortable truths behind polite memories. I understood that, still the thought stayed with me. Someone saw something, someone watched him leave without stopping him. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through the remaining names. Fewer now, my thumb slowed. I can call. Not yet. Instead, I looked out the window and watched the afternoon settle in, light shifting, shadows moving across the yard. Time continuing its quiet work. The wedding had been full of witnesses, but witnesses only matter if they speak. And as the room filled again with silence, I knew this wasn't the end of the asking. It was just the part where the truth began choosing who would carry it next. Yay. The bank doors sighed open like they recognized me. Cool air brushed my face. Fluorescent light flattened everything it touched. I stood just inside for a moment, letting my eyes adjust, letting my breathing catch up to my body. The floor shone with a polish that smelled faintly of lemons. Somewhere, a printer hummed. Somewhere else, a phone rang and stopped. Life moved quietly here, orderly, contanded. I took a number from the machine. The slip of paper felt thin between my fingers. Temporary. I sat in a plastic chair that didn't quite reach my knees and folded my hands together the way I always had when waiting for answers I wasn't sure I wanted. Across from me, a woman counted coins into a small envelope. An older man stared at the floor like it might open and explain something. A young couple whispered, shoulders touching, hopeful in a way I recognized from long ago. My number blinked. I stood and walked to the counter, the sound of my shoes echoing louder than necessary. The clerk looked up and smiled, a practiced smile. Kind but careful, how can I help you today? She asked. I slid my phone across the counter. My hand lingered on it longer than it should have. Yang, there's a withdrawal, I said. I need to understand it. She typed without comment, fingers quick, efficient. Her eyes moved across the screen, then paused. Something shifted in her face. Not alarm, just awareness. She glanced around once, then lowered her voice. Let me print this for you, she said. The printer whirred behind her. The sound felt louder than it was. She tore the paper carefully and slid it across the counter, her finger resting near the bottom like she didn't want it to drift too far from either of us. I looked down. The numbers were neat, clean, lined up in black ink that didn't shake or apologize. Time, date, amount, hours after the wedding, Adoradas, no pending status, no hold, no question marks, just gone. My throat tightened, but my face stayed still. I traced the line with my finger, slow. Like if I followed it carefully enough, it might lead me somewhere else. There was no fraud alert? I asked. She shook her head gently. The credentials matched, she said. It went through as a standard transaction. No hesitation in her voice, just a fact. So it was him, I said, more to myself than to her. She didn't answer that. She didn't have to. I nodded once, folded the paper, then unfolded it again. The creases didn't change the truth. I tucked it into my coat pocket, where it rested against my chest like something alive. "And is there anything else I can help you with?" she asked softly. I shook my head. She wished me a good day. Her eyes lingered just a moment longer than required. "King." I stepped away from the counter and stood near the window, the one that faced the street. Sunlight poured through it, catching dust in the air, making everything look gentler than it felt. Outside, cars passed. A woman laughed into her phone. Someone carried a box out of a shop next door, careful not to drop it. I thought of the envelope table again, the white cloth, the quiet counting, the eyes that watched without touching. Yekin. I remembered how he stood near it once, back straight, hands clasped behind him like he was guarding something fragile. Or maybe like he was being guarded. I tried to picture him at the bank terminal, or wherever he'd been when it happened. Late night, after smiles, after vows, was he alone? Or was someone standing close enough to guide his hand? I folded the statement again and slipped it deeper into my pocket. It didn't belong in the open, not yet. Surferney. The doors sighed again as I stepped outside. Warm air met me, heavy with afternoon. The street felt louder now, less contained. I walked to my car slowly, keys already in my hand. I didn't unlock it right away. Instead, I leaned against the door and closed my eyes. Again, I saw him as a boy, counting change at the kitchen table, tongue pressed to the corner of his mouth, serious about getting it right. He always was. I saw him last night, smiling just enough, holding his wife's hand, standing near that table like it mattered more than anyone knew. I opened my eyes. The question settled in me again, heavier now. Did he take it, or was it taken for him? Those are two different kinds of leaving. One is choice, the other is pressure. I got into the car and sat with the door closed, listening to the sounds of the street dull around me. The paper rustled in my pocket when I shifted. I rested my hand there, feeling its presence. Okay. I didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I watched the bank through the windshield, the clean windows, the orderly lines, a place where things disappear quietly, legally, without raising voices. I wondered how many stories passed through that counter every day. How many lives changed with the slide of a paper and a lowered voice. Finally, I turned the key. The engine came to life, steady and familiar. I pulled away from the curb and joined the flow of traffic, letting it carry me without deciding where I was going yet. And at the first red light, I reached into my pocket and unfolded the statement one more time. The ink hadn't faded, the truth didn't blink. I folded it carefully and tucked it back. Somewhere ahead, I knew the answer waited. Whether it came from him or from someone else who had stood too close that night, the light turned green. I drove on, carrying the question with me, knowing now that money doesn't just disappear. It moves, and whoever moved it had left fingerprints that silence couldn't erase forever. The curtains were already drawn when I pulled up. Midday light pressed against the fabric from the outside, pale and patient, like it knew better than to ask in. The house sat neat and square at the end of the street, hedges trimmed, steps swept clean. Nothing out of place, nothing willing to speak first. I stayed in the car longer than necessary, engine off, keys still in my hand. The air smelled like warmed dust and leaves. Somewhere nearby, a lawnmower hummed and stopped. I watched the front door, waiting for it to change its mind. It didn't. I walked up the path and knocked. The sound felt small, quickly swallowed by the house. A few seconds passed. Then the door opened just enough to let a face appear. She smiled, not wide, careful. "Yep, please," she said, opening the door fully. "Come in." Inside, the house was cool and orderly. Shoes lined up by the door, a runner rug stretched down the hall, vacuum lines still visible. Family photos on the wall, all framed the same, all evenly spaced. A home that practiced restraint. They guided me into the living room. Sunlight leaked around the edges of the curtains, turning the air dim and soft. A teapot sat on the coffee table already, steam rising like it had been waiting too. "Tia?" she asked. "King?" I nodded out of habit, then wished I hadn't. She poured. The cup was warm when she placed it in my hands. I set it on the table untouched. The steam curled and disappeared. They sat across from me, her mother, her uncle, another relative I couldn't place. All of them angled toward me slightly, attentive without leaning in, concern arranged neatly on their faces. "We're just so worried," her mother said. "We had no idea." I watched her hands as she spoke. "Shupambasafak." They were folded in her lap, fingers still. "No idea about what?" I asked. She blinked once, then sighed. Dispersion of an half in tree prashings be enters at the worst sup a dimmer of sung money, bas Mary in the coppa shavanachurch. "Any of this," she said. "Your son disappearing. The money. It's all such a shock." Shock is loud. This was quiet. They spoke in turns like they'd rehearsed the rhythm. Confusion, surprise, concern. Each word placed carefully, not overlapping, not leaving gaps. We loved him, the uncle said. He fit right in. I nodded. I let them talk. We never saw anything strange, someone added. The wedding was beautiful. That word again. I glanced around the room at the spotless shelves the coasters set out in advance. The way nothing looked lived in, only maintained. I picked up the teacup and felt the warmth through the porcelain. I didn't drink. I set it back down. He withdrew a large sum of money, I said, hours after the wedding. Can't. A pause, Breesh, mestered, mestered. Her mother looked at the uncle. The uncle looked at the floor. Well, he said finally, you know how things are these days. I waited, Debt, he added. It's everywhere. Medical bills. Loans, it piles up, no one's fault really, like weather. I looked at him then, really looked. He met my eyes for a second, then glanced away. You're saying he knew about this? I asked. They exchanged looks, quick, practiced. He was very generous, her mother said. He wanted to help. Kang, I thought of the envelope table, the watching. I thought of the envelope table, the watching, the counting without counting. Did he talk to you about it? I asked. No, aber Bersham Shamanchen Sumbird. No, she said too quickly. Then softened it, not in detail. I nodded slowly. Gay. The house was quiet enough that I could hear the clock ticking in the other room. Each second placed neatly after the last. I just want to understand, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. If he left on his own or if something pushed him, they leaned forward then, just a little. No one pushed him, the uncle said, and true Shatracalers. No one pushed him, the uncle said. He made his own choices. The words landed flat, like something read from a page. Her mother reached for the teapot and topped off my cup, though I hadn't touched it. The tea sloshed slightly, then settled. I'm sure he'll come back, she said, once things calm down. Kenka. I looked at the drawn curtains again, at the way the light tried to get in and failed. Things don't calm down on their own, I said. They're calmed by people. No one answered that. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, managed. I stood then, slowly. The room adjusted around the movement, chairs creaking softly, attention sharpening. Thank you for the tea, I said. Oh, of course, her mother said, standing too. Anytime they walked me to the door, polite, careful. Careful. The kind of kindness that doesn't leave fingerprints. At the threshold, her mother touched my arm lightly. Her hand was cool. We're family now, she said. We're kumpum pression de nak shenan. We're family now, the nak. We're family now, she said. We'll get through this together. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. Outside, the light felt brighter than before, honest. I stepped down onto the path and turned back once. The door closed softly behind me, no slam, no rush, just a click. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sound settle. The house went quiet again, curtains still drawn, truth still inside. As I walked back to my car, I realized something small and sharp. They hadn't asked where he was. Baking. Not once. I sat behind the wheel and looked at the house until it blurred slightly at the edges. The hedges didn't move, the curtains didn't shift. Polite walls hold many things, they keep out weather. They keep in stories. I started the engine and pulled away, the house shrinking in the mirror. Somewhere behind those walls, conversations would resume. Tea would be poured again. Concern would be rearranged. And somewhere between their version of events and mine, the truth waited, quiet, patient, unwilling, to stay hidden forever. The kitchen light hummed the way it always did at night, not loud, just present. Like it didn't trust the dark to do its job alone. I stood at the sink with my hands in warm water, a plate resting against my palm. The clock on the wall said, Joel, Sisser T. The house had settled into its evening posture, doors closed, floors cooled, shadows choosing their places. That's when my phone lit up just once, a small rectangle of light on the counter. Bright enough to pull my eyes away from everything else, long enough for one name to appear, his name Torm Nifteri. 6-8. Then it went dark, no ring, no vibration, just the light, and then nothing. I turned the faucet off. The sudden quiet felt heavier than the water had. I dried my hands slowly, carefully, like if I rushed, I might miss something else important trying to happen. I picked up the phone, the screen was blank, no missed call notification, no voicemail icon, nothing to prove what I had just seen, but my heart was already moving faster than thought. I sat down at the table, the chair creaking beneath me like it remembered other nights, other weights. The phone lay in my hand, warm now, as if it had passed through his palm on the way to mine. Outside, a dog barked once, sharp, certain, then stopped. I stared at the screen, willing it to light again. Willing the name to return. I didn't blink, I didn't breathe right. Seconds passed, or minutes. Time felt unreliable. I pressed the side button, the screen woke up, obedient but empty. My reflection stared back at me, older, thinner eyes fixed on something that wasn't there anymore. I checked the call log, nothing. I checked voicemail, nothing. I set the phone down and folded my hands around it like that might coax the truth out. Ken, I thought about the way his name appeared. Clear, undeniable, not a number, not unknown. Him. I replayed it in my head, frame by frame, like a moment from a film you pause too late. The exact shape of the letters, the way the light caught the edge of the screen, the way my chest tightened before my mind caught up outside, the night resumed its quiet work. A car passed at the end of the street. Somewhere a door closed, life continuing in small, unbothered ways. And I stayed where I was. If it had been a mistake, it was a cruel one. The kind that finds you when you're already leaning forward. If it was a warning, I didn't yet know from whom. I picked the phone up again and called his number. My thumb hovered for half a second before pressing, like it needed permission, straight to voicemail. I didn't speak. I ended the call before the beep peeped. The silence afterward felt arranged. Deliberate, I stood and walked to the window. The glass was cool under my fingertip. The street looked the same as it always had. Porch lights on, trees standing still, shadows behaving themselves. Nothing looked broken. That's what made it harder. I returned to the table and sat down again. The chair sighed. I listened to the clock tick, each second placing itself carefully after the last. I remembered him as a boy, calling me from the other room just to ask a question he already knew the answer to. Remembered how his voice sounded when he was unsure, steady but just a little quieter. The phone stayed dark. I thought about the house where he now might be, or the place he had left behind. I thought about the watch in my pocket, the way it no longer ticked unless I wound it. Time waiting for a hand to move it forward. The dog barked again. Once, then quiet. I realized my shoulders were tight, drawn up without my noticing. I let them fall. I took a slow breath and then another. Call again, I said aloud, my voice low. The house didn't answer. When their train duding mained. The house didn't answer. I didn't call. I set the phone face up on the table and leaned back, giving myself space. Sometimes things return when you stop reaching. Minutes passed, nothing. The kitchen felt too bright now. I turned the light off and let the room soften. The glow from the street lamp outside filtered in through the window, pale and forgiving. And in that softer light, the phone looked smaller, less certain. I wondered where he had been when the call came through, if his hand had slipped, if someone had spoken his name and startled him, if he had changed his mind at the last second. I wondered if he'd wanted me to see his name, if that was the point. My chest tightened again, not with panic, but with recognition. This wasn't silence. It was communication stripped down to its smallest unit. I picked the phone up one last time and typed a message. Again, I saw your call, I'm here. I stared at the words before sending them, read them again, simple, unaccusing. I pressed send. The message showed delivered, not read. I set the phone down gently, like it might bruise if I wasn't careful. Outside, the streetlight flickered once, then steadied. The night settled back into itself. I sat there for a long time, listening to the house breathe, to the faint sounds of pipes and distant traffic, to the space between moments where answers sometimes live. The phone didn't light up again, but it had already said enough. As I finally stood to turn in for the night, I slipped the phone into my pocket. Its weight felt different now, purposeful. Whatever that call had been, mistake or warning, it had crossed a line. It had reached me, and as I climbed the stairs, the house quiet behind me, I knew something else, too. He wasn't as far away as he wanted me to believe, and the next time his name appeared, it wouldn't vanish so easily. The sun hung low when I turned onto the dirt road. Its light was soft, spilled gold across the fields like a promise no one could keep. The wind had picked up, brushing against the car with a quiet insistence. It carried the scent of earth, hay, and something faint, like smoke from a long-forgotten fire. And I slowed as I approached the field where he used to park. The one he always went to when life pressed too hard, when the world felt too loud. King. I remembered the car, tucked in the tall grass, engine off, music low, his hands resting on the wheel, as if holding on to something invisible. And I stopped at the edge. The grass was flattened in one spot. Fresh, still pressed down like someone had been there recently. Tire marks led into the field, then faded into nothing, swallowed by dirt and grass. I pressed my palm to the hood and felt the metal cool under my hand. Somehow, it grounded me. The wind shifted and carried a voice, not real but memory-shaped. The way he laughed softly when no one was around. Ken, the way he muttered complaints at the sky when it rained. Okay. I closed my eyes and let the wind play with the memory. It was a small thing, fleeting, but it made the absence heavier. I stepped out of the car, boots crunching the gravel. The field was empty, silent except for the whispering grass. Each step brought me closer to the flattened patch. I knelt and pressed my fingers against the earth. It had been disturbed, not old recent. Someone had waited here, someone had left. I traced the tire marks with my eyes. They curved, hesitated, disappeared. No clues beyond the imprint in dirt. No footprints, no sign of life, just the memory of him in this place that had always been his refuge. The air carried the faint scent of his cologne. I turned my head. Nothing. Empty. Yet the scent lingered, as though the field itself remembered. I breathed it in anyway. A reminder that he had been here, or that he was still somehow near. I walked slowly along the edge, letting the wind brush my cheeks. The sun cast long shadows across the grass, and I imagined him walking beside me, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon, thinking thoughts too big to speak. Why return to a place meant for solitude? Was it habit, or did he want someone to follow? I stopped at the middle of the flattened patch. Kneeling again, I pressed my fingers into the soil. It was soft from recent rain. The impression of the car's weight lingered in the ground. A memory of his presence settled in my chest like a stone. I stayed there longer than I thought I could. The field breathed quietly, the wind carrying whispers of what had been. Caned. I thought about the bank, the wedding, the missing money. I thought about the empty room, the phone that had lit up for a second, the questions I had yet to ask. Each thought was a thread stretching toward him, fragile and taut. I imagined him sliding into the driver's seat here, hands on the wheel, the world receding, the noise slipping away. I imagined him staring at the horizon, considering choices no one else would understand. Maybe he came back to remember, or maybe to hide, maybe both. I stood and let the wind brush past me, ruffling my hair, tugging at the coat around my shoulders. The field stretched on, quiet and patient, no answers. Only the scent of grass, the flattened patch, the fading tire marks. I looked back at my car. The engine hummed softly, waiting. I didn't feel ready to leave yet, and part of me wanted to stay, to wait for some sign, some flicker that would tell me where he had gone next. But the sun continued its slow descent, washing the sky in colors too beautiful to ignore. I exhaled slowly and turned toward the car. My boots pressed into the grass, leaving marks that would soon vanish. I glanced once more at the flattened patch, at the empty horizon. It seemed to whisper to me, carried in the wind, he had been here, and somewhere beyond my sight he still was. I opened the car door and slid in, the leather cold beneath my hands. The engine started with a soft hum. I drove slowly out of the field, leaving the flattened patch behind. The wind followed me a few steps, then settled back into its place, silent and patient. The road stretched ahead, uncertain, questions hung in the air, unspoken. The field receded in the rearview mirror, but the memory of him stayed, and I knew somehow I would return. Because some places, like some people, don't let you go. They wait, and they remind you that solitude isn't always emptiness. It's a signal. A place where truth can be found if you dare to look. The hallway smelled faintly of polished wood and candle wax. Light filtered through the narrow window, dust motes drifting slowly in the shaft. I found her standing by the staircase, hands clasped loosely, shoulders tense but trying not to show it. The quiet in the house pressed against me, and I realized I had been holding my breath. I didn't greet her immediately. I studied her first, the way her eyes flicked to the floor before meeting mine. The way her lips pressed together, careful and precise. This was her stage, and I had just entered it. Can we talk? I said softly. No accusation, no demand, just a question floating in the air, waiting for a response. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. We moved to the small sitting room. The room was tidy, a vase of white lilies on the table, untouched. Sunlight glinted off the wood floor. Everything was calm, everything practiced. She sat, and I remained standing for a moment, letting the silence settle between us. And then I lowered myself into the chair across from her. We didn't speak at first. Just breathing, the subtle shuffle of fabric as she adjusted her posture, the faint ticking of the clock. He left willingly, she said finally. Her voice was steady, even. But her hands trembled slightly as she said his name. I watched the subtle movement, a small betrayal of the story she offered. Your son wanted a clean start, she added, eyes fixed somewhere beyond me. I leaned forward slowly. Did he say anything to you about the money? The words hovered, heavy, uncomfortable. Her eyes dropped. A quick glance at the floor, then the wall. Her hands tightened in her lap. The lilies on the table caught a shaft of light, white and fragile. And the room seemed to hold its breath with me. I don't know, she said, her voice cracked just slightly. Again, just enough to reveal doubt. Just enough to make the lie tremble at its edges. I didn't press immediately. I let the silence do part of the work. It stretched, tangible like a shadow pooling between us. How much silence does it take to build a lie? I wondered if she was counting seconds, weighing each pause, deciding how much truth to let slip. Her eyes flicked toward mine again, quicker this time, a small acknowledgment, a question buried beneath the practiced calm. I noticed the faint quiver of her lips. The way she avoided naming the sum, the envelope, the careful watching at the wedding, I exhaled slowly. Did he leave a note? I asked, not expecting one, not needing one. But the question hung anyway, waiting to see what would surface. No, she said, her voice small now, uncertain. Cat. She looked down at her hands again, twisting a ring around her finger. I watched the movement, mechanical, rehearsed, a distraction from something unspoken. The room smelled faintly of her perfume and something else, clean linen, tension. I could almost hear the memory of him here, walking through this, same space, laughing softly, not noticing the threads of unease already forming. Yeah, I didn't speak for a moment, just watched the way she shifted in her seat. The way the light caught her eyes in brief flashes. The way the lilies leaned slightly toward the window, as if aware that truth was hard to hold upright. Disease and frapsche kamschulstek termayan sands, not demanding nyan tumtring castration. Did he say why he had to go? I asked, voice quieter this time, a whisper, not demanding, not accusing. Just reaching. Her hands shook again. She breathed in, then out slowly, he said. It's complicated, she admitted. Not the whole truth, not even close. I nodded once, letting the acknowledgement sit, no sudden movements, no rising voice. The silence between us thickened. I felt it pressing against my chest, quiet and heavy like it had weight. I need to know about the money, I said finally, not a question this time, a statement soft but firm. She didn't look at me. Her gaze traveled to the floor, her jaw tightened. I don't know, she said again, more insistently this time. Her voice trembled slightly. I realized the lie was fragile, held together only by careful silence and avoidance. The clock ticked. We both listened to it. I could hear my own heartbeat, rapid and steady beneath the tension. The lilies swayed slightly in the sunlight. I imagined him here, in the space between words, between breaths, knowing more than he let on. I leaned back, letting the chair hold me. The room seemed to exhale with me. Her lips parted slightly. Her hands relaxed, but only a little. The weight of the unspoken stretched across the room, linking us in quiet understanding. I want the truth, I said. Not loudly, not angrily, just enough to let her know I could bear it. She met my eyes then, fleetingly, before looking away again. And I thought about the envelope table, the counting, the careful watching. I thought about his smile that didn't reach his eyes. I thought about everything left behind, everything we still had to face. She finally lifted her gaze, a brief, hesitant acknowledgement. Not courage, not confession, just a flicker of recognition that the truth mattered. I stood slowly, letting the weight of the chair beneath me remind me that I was still grounded. The lilies caught the light again, fragile and white. The room was still waiting for something to break. I walked toward the door. She didn't follow. She didn't look at me again. The hallway waited, quiet and patient. I stepped into it. The floor creaked lightly under my feet. The sun outside had shifted, painting long shadows across the walls. I paused, glancing back once. Her hands still trembled. Her eyes were fixed somewhere beyond me. And I knew the lie would hold for a little longer, held together by the silence she had learned to keep. The door closed softly behind me. No slam, no announcement, just the quiet, and the memory of the words we hadn't said. I walked down the steps slowly. I walked down the steps slowly, letting each creak of the wood remind me I was moving forward, a careful step at a time. Outside the air was cooler, scented with evening and distant rain. I breathed it in, steadying myself. She had said he left willingly. She had not said why. She had not mentioned the money. And in the silence, I realized that sometimes the quiet carries more weight than any words ever could. I turned to my car, shadows stretching long across the lawn. The evening air wrapped around me. Somewhere ahead he waited, or perhaps he didn't, and somewhere behind, the truth lingered, fragile, patient, and almost untouchable. The phone sat on the kitchen counter, a small rectangle of silence under the morning light. Sunlight sliced across the countertop in sharp lines, dust motes drifting in lazy arcs. I watched it, half expecting it to ring, half dreading it. The quiet pressed in around me, holding every shadow still. The kettle hadn't whistled yet, but I could already feel the house listening. I poured coffee slowly, Drakras and Tenferhamter Cirque. I poured coffee slowly, the liquid dark and smooth, steam rising in faint spirals. My hands lingered on the cup, feeling its warmth. needing it to steady more than my body. Days had passed since I last heard his voice. Days of silence, of doors left unopened, of questions looping in my mind like a song I couldn't remember all the words to. Argane. I sat at the table, elbows resting on the cool wood, the cup between my hands. Outside, the wind moved through bare branches, tapping lightly against the window pane. And I thought about the money, the empty rooms, a flattened field, the envelope table, like everything tangled together, a knot of worry, fear, and confusion, and yet I didn't pick up the phone. Not yet. It rang then, a sharp, sudden tone that startled me, and I nearly dropped the cup. I looked at the screen, heart climbing faster than thought. His name flickered, small and precise. I pressed it, hands trembling, and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello?" I whispered. Okay. His voice was thin, steady, and unfamiliar, like it had traveled a long distance to reach me. I didn't want you to find out like this," he said, no apology, no excuse. Just the careful weight of truth being set in front of me. Can. I sank into the chair, gripping the edges as though they could hold me upright. "What do you mean?" I asked. Voice small, cautious. "The money," he said, pause heavy and deliberate. "It was leverage, not theft. Pressure applied where it would hurt most." Yokent, I froze, the words carving a hollow inside me. Leverage, not theft. The distinction made no difference, and all the difference at once. I thought of the wedding hall, the careful counting of envelopes, the smiles that didn't reach eyes. I thought of the empty rooms, the silent phone calls, the way everything had seemed so ordinary until it wasn't. He had been pulling strings I couldn't see, fighting battles I had no knowledge of. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, voice cracking slightly. Not anger, not accusation, just the quiet need to understand. "I had to leave," he said. "Leave to keep you safe. To end something you never saw coming." There was a pause, a breath, a weight in the line that made me close my eyes. The room felt colder, the light thinner, the world pressing against me with its usual quiet insistence. I imagined him sitting somewhere, borrowed phone in hand, staring at a wall I could not see. The line crackled slightly, small static filling the spaces between words. I imagined the choices he had made, the exits he had taken, the silences he had kept, and I felt a strange mixture of relief and heartbreak, the two impossible to separate. "So, it was all to protect me?" I asked, whispering it as though speaking louder might break it. "Yes," he said. "Yes, but protection can take many shapes. Some are hard to recognize, some feel like betrayal." And I felt the weight of the statement settle over me. Could protection and betrayal share the same shape? I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The line was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that listens, and I wanted to speak, to ask more, to understand the details of what had happened, but the weight of it was too much. Words felt fragile, incapable of carrying the truth fully. "Cal," he spoke again, voice soft, almost brittle. "I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because I did." The sentence hung between us, simple and devastating. I pressed my forehead to the back of my hand, feeling the rough skin, the pulse beneath. Everything shifted in that moment. The confusion, the worry, the anger, they all reframed themselves as something else. Like a pain wrapped around care, betrayal wrapped around love. I understand," I whispered. "Not completely. Never fully. But enough to feel the space between us change." The line crackled again, faint and insistent. And then it went dead, no goodbye, no lingering echo, just silence. I held the phone, stunned, letting it rest against my ear a moment longer. The sunlight shifted, brushing across the counter in long lines, dust motes drifting lazily in their shafts. The world continued, unaware of the fragile revelations it had carried to me in a borrowed voice. "Mast." I set the phone down gently. The table beneath my hands was cool. The cup of coffee, untouched, was now tepid. Outside, the wind shifted, ruffling leaves and brushing against the house like a quiet reminder. I leaned back in the chair, eyes closing. The tension in my shoulders slowly eased, though the knot in my chest remained. I thought of him, wherever he was, borrowed phone, thin voice, decisions made in silence. I thought of the choices that had shaped days, weeks, months without my knowledge. Could protection feel like betrayal? Could a choice made in shadow be an act of love? Answers were messy, uncertain, and yet they existed. At Ferschen Setzer Kashing Tepperperd Tunek de Benakshur, Furching Sheffermive. I opened my eyes and looked at the window. Sunlight had softened. Shadows leaned long and thin across the floor, and the house was quiet, waiting patient. Takanako. I reached for the phone again, as if its weight might offer more than it had, but I didn't call. Not yet. Instead, I sat there, let the silence wrap around me, and thought about him, the truth he had given me, the fragile shape of protection and betrayal. And for the first time in days, I felt a small sliver of understanding. The wind stirred outside, carrying faint scents of earth and rain. I breathed it in slowly, steadying myself. The line had gone dead, but somehow the truth remained alive. And I knew that while the phone was quiet, the story was not. It would unfold, slowly, in its own time, and I would wait, patient like the dust motes in the morning light. The kettle whistled finally. The sound was sharp in the stillness, a reminder that life continued. I let it rise, rising with me. And for the first time since the call, I allowed myself to hope that understanding, like the morning light, might reach even the hardest corners of the heart. The mantle is empty except for his watch. It sits there, wound but untouched, its hands moving in quiet insistence. Sunlight catches the metal, glinting softly like a secret the room has held for too long. The house listens. The floorboards remember every step, every creak of his shoes, every quiet departure. I reach for the watch sometimes just to feel the weight in my hand. It's heavy with absence. The mornings are quieter now. The light filters through half-closed blinds, soft and hesitant. I move through the kitchen slowly, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant creak of the stairwell. I pour coffee, steam curling in lazy spirals, and breathe in the smell of beans and toast. It smells ordinary, but ordinary carries its own kind of pain. Kent. I remember him here, leaning against the counter, smiling, not with his eyes, but with enough warmth to make it feel real. I set the cup down carefully, noticing the small dents and scratches in the countertop. Each one carries memory, a small echo of life before absence. I run my fingers along the edge, imagining him reaching for the same space, imagining him laughing at a joke I no longer remember. The emptiness presses against me softly, like a shadow settling in a corner. Again, the phone sits on the counter, silent and still. I don't check it much anymore. His voice lingers in my mind, thin and steady but gone. The line that crackled, that carried the truth, is quiet now. Again, I think about the money, the leverage, the choices I never fully understood. It's gone, all of it. And the absence is palpable. I move through the house, picking up small things, arranging them, the mantle, the table. The vase of lilies that never quite bloom the same. Life continues, quieter, softer, shaped around the spaces he left. I hear his footsteps sometimes, fleeting, imagined in the hallway. I turn, expecting him, but the room just light and shadow, dust motes drifting like memories. I keep his watch wound, though I never wear it. It ticks steadily, a reminder that time moves on even when people do not. I imagine him looking at it somewhere else, thinking of home, thinking of me, or not thinking at all. It's both comforting and cruel, a presence without a person. Some days I walk past the door as if expecting him to return. I hear the faintest creak of the hinges in my mind, the soft shuffle of shoes against wood. I breathe in deeply, waiting for a knock that never comes. The wind rattles the windows, carrying a memory of laughter, a smell of cologne, a fragment of goodbye. I close my eyes and let the house speak for him, letting each sound fill the empty spaces. I water the plants, I fold laundry, I sweep the floors. The rhythm is steady, comforting in its ordinariness, but beneath it lingers a question: how do you live alongside absence without breaking? The answer comes slowly, like dawn creeping across the walls. You learn, not completely, not fully, but enough to breathe without it choking you. I place the watch back on the mantel and trace the rim with my fingers. Its ticking fills the silence, gentle, consistent. I imagine it marking time for both of us, though one of us is missing. The room holds memories as if they were objects, as if absence could be touched. I reach for one, then another, letting them settle around me. Outside, the garden is quiet. The wind carries a faint scent of earth and frost. I think about the field he used to visit, the grass flattened, the tire marks that led nowhere. The places he inhabited, in life and memory, linger like echoes. Some mornings I almost hear his steps at the door, almost. And the almost is enough to make me pause, to make my heart tighten, to make me remember. I sit in the living room looking at the empty spaces, tracing the outlines of presence with my eyes. The mantel, the watch, the floorboards, everything left behind carries a fragment of him, a fragment of what was. And feels full and empty in the scarecam. The house feels full and empty at once. I breathe, I listen, I let it be. The kettle whistles, faint and precise. I pour water, watch the steam rise. I imagine him here, hand brushing mine as he reaches for the cup. The moment passes, and I remember it is only memory, only presence, imagined. I take the watch in my hand once more, feeling its pulse against my palm. Time continues to move, and I with it, though not together, not fully. The ticking is steady. The light across the mantel is warm, the house is quiet. I stand and walk to the window, looking out at the street, the trees, the spaces where life continues. A bird lands on the fence, pauses, then flies away. I watch it go, thinking about what remains. God, the money will never return, he will never return, not completely. I place the watch back gently, letting it mark the time I cannot reclaim. I close the blinds slowly, the shadows falling across the floor like a soft reminder. The rhythm of life continues, shaped around absence, carrying memory, carrying me. I breathe in again, steady, deliberate. Skillish is not a moment. Skillishan is learning to live with what remains. I look at the mantle, at the watch, at the quiet house, and I begin. The kettle sighs. Sunlight stretches across the room, soft and patient. I am here. The past is here, shaped into memory. The future is quiet, waiting, and I will learn to live with it.